Hey guys, this week we have a paper to write. I want to do a video to kind of help walk you through it, and that way maybe save you some time and some effort. So I would highly recommend you watch this video to its end to make sure that you get all the information you need. If you go into the module, you'll find where you can get the requirements and the rubric, and when you open that, it takes you to another page. And so here's the requirements, and then if you scroll down, you'll see that they provide you with the rubric. So what they want you to do is go through a company that you decide on and use that company as an example for explaining some of the costing and overhead methods that you learn in the chapter. So first things first is you need to go through the chapter and understand costing methods and what traditional and activity-based costing is all about. And then you're going to go ahead and write the paper. So think about a company you want to write about. So if you know a company that you want to write about, maybe you work for it or you're familiar with it, that's probably the best scenario because you're so familiar. Now, if you decide to choose a company that you're not affiliated with, just be aware that if you choose a big mega company like Apple or Amazon, that could come with some problems. I mean, Amazon does so many different things, Apple does so many different things, that if you try to write on the entire company, that's going to be a big challenge. Instead, if you really want to write about, for example, Apple, just pick one element of it. Just do the manufacturing or just do the service side of Apple. I would recommend doing that instead of trying to write the paper on the entire company. And if you know a company that you work for, maybe a company that manufactures something like skateboards, then because you know about it, that company, it's going to be a little bit easier to write about it. Here are the criteria. Now notice that the criteria that are here make up the rubric, a big part of the rubric. For example, identify the company selected and provide a brief overview. Identify company selected and provide a brief overview. So you can see how this is making up the rubric. So to start with, what I'm going to do is I just copied this information from here down, and I'm going to bring it onto a Word doc. So I've got it here. Now let me take this and reformat it. Okay, so all I did was take that exact information and reformat it, and you can see these are all the different elements of the rubric, and these are things you need to write about. The first part is the company overview, then the costing methods, then the factory overhead, and then a recommendation. So what you should do is take each of the questions that are provided for you in the problem and just write a paragraph or two about each of these. I like to see things that are very specific, so the more specific you are, the better you'll do. The company overview, identify the company selected and provide a brief overview, and then discuss if it's manufacturing, merchandising, or service organization. You should discuss that and why you think it's that. Why do you think it's merchandising, for example? Then the costing method. Compare the job order and process costing methods. So you need to discuss each of those first. Explain how each can be applied to the company. So take each of these sentences and then just turn that into a paragraph or two to explain every part of this. That way you're covering all of the rubric. Then you get to the factory overhead. Outline possible indirect or overhead costs. With the company you chose, what are some examples of overhead costs that you think they might have? Identify the type of costing that might be used for these. For example, activity-based and traditional costing. If you decided to recommend ABC, activity-based costing, then what are some cost drivers? After you read the chapter, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Explain what a cost driver is and why you chose those cost drivers. Remember, be specific. A paragraph or two for each of these is going to be perfect. And then the end is a recommendation. Based on your analysis, recommend a costing method for the company. So you discuss some costing methods above. Why do you recommend that one? And explain why you think that method will work for you. Again, be specific. Going back to our rubric, answering all those questions is going to get you through the company, the costing, the factory overhead, the recommendation. But there's also this articulation of response and citations and attributions. So the articulation of response means that you are correct in your spelling and grammar, and that everything is nice and organized and has a good flow to it. In other words, is it clear? You need to make sure that you use proper grammar and spelling. And then the citation. So if you use any source, which you probably have to, you're not an expert, so if you use the textbook or any source, make sure you provide the APA format reference. Make sure you don't just put a URL. URLs are not the same as a reference. And if you don't do that, if you copy and paste basically you are plagiarizing. So you don't want to do that at all. If you use a quote, then you need to use proper referencing of the quote. However, I'll tell you this, I suggest you don't use any quotes. This is not about you quoting information, it's about you explaining it, and I like to hear the student's explanation instead of a quote. One more thing, notice it says submit a 2 to 4 page Word document. If you're following all the requirements and answering all the required questions, let's go to look at those questions again. If you're answering all these questions and putting a paragraph or two for each, then that will be long enough, and it should actually give you at least 2 pages. But if it gives you a little more, that's fine. But if you're worried so much about how many pages, worry more about answering these questions and providing enough detail for each of these. Because if you do that, you're hitting all the points of the rubric, and if you do that, you're covering all that basis that you need. Just make sure that you put enough detail with them and be specific, and you should be fine. Not worry so much about how many pages, but making sure that you cover everything.